What's up, everybody? This is a piece titled "The Mask Is Off" by James Burnham. It's from the collection of lost texts of critical Marxism, titled "The Fate of the Russian Revolution," edited by Sean Matgamna. There's a little introduction here. It's like a paragraph long. It's not to this particular piece, but to the section that this piece is located in within that collection, and the part of that collection that this piece is from is titled "The Two Souls of Trotskyism." The piece, "The Mask Is Off" itself, is from New International, September 1939. So I'm going to read the introduction to this chapter since it's right here, and then I'm going to read the actual piece. On the 23rd of August 1939, Stalin signed a pact with Hitler. It was clear from the start, and soon became clearer, that this was not just another defensive treaty of the sort that the Soviet Union had signed with many imperialist governments to right back to 1918. Stalin was directly helping Hitler in imperialist conquest, and taking his own share of the plunder, too. The Marxists who fought the Stalinist counter-revolution yet still felt obliged to defend the Soviet Union's statized economy against capitalism had reached a fork in the road. What did the old, quote, defense, end quote, of the USSR mean now? Albert Goldman argued for supporting the Stalinist invasion of Poland as a legitimate defensive move, and in any case a lesser evil than Nazi conquest of the whole country. Max Shachtman and others said that their former policy of, quote, unconditional defense of the Soviet Union despite Stalin, end quote, must be modified to allow for unequivocal opposition to the USSR in its conquest of eastern Poland and later Finland. Leon Trotsky, and with him the majority of the American Trotskyists, insisted on maintaining, quote, unconditional defense of the Soviet Union, end quote, while condemning the Stalinist invasions. The implicit assumption was that the invasions were secondary and marginal events in a context dominated by a world war in which the USSR would surely soon be under attack. The ensuing political dispute divided Trotskyism into two currents, which diverged further as Stalinist imperialism grew and expanded. So here we are, "The Mask Off" by James Burnham. The mask is off at last. The blood-stained monstrous face of Stalinism is exposed. Now, for the whole world to see quite clearly. The illusions, the veils, the deceptions are abandoned. Stalin, as the press of the Fourth International has consistently predicted since Munich, has capitulated to Hitler. Footnote. Quote, Stalin agonizes, end quote. Editorial note from New International, November 1938. All this is from that piece. Stalin agonizes, from New International, November 1938. Quote, the cost of Stalinism, not simply to the workers of the world but to the Soviet Union itself, becomes suddenly clear after Munich. What will the Kremlin do? Stalin cannot make a revolutionary turn, if for no other reason, because the first victim of such a turn, if actually made, would be himself. The parties of the Comintern cannot make such a turn, if for no other reason, because they are no longer political parties in the genuine sense of the term. They are merely groups of agents of the Foreign Office and the GPU. If they now begin to appear, occasionally to jerk to the left, this does not at all express a real political movement toward the left, but the momentary exigency of the counter-revolutionary Foreign Office of the Kremlin. We do not interpret a momentary progressive vote by a stool pigeon in a union as signifying that he is moving leftward. We know that it merely answers the orders of his employer. The Kremlin has already made a preliminary sounding of what it is going to try to do through its mouthpiece, Duranty. I'm going to look up who Duranty is. Walter Duranty lived from 1884 to 1957 and was an Anglo-American journalist who served as a Moscow bureau chief of the New York Times for 14 years, 1922 to 1936, following the Bolshevik victory in the Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1923. In 1923, Duranty received a Pulitzer Prize for a series of reports about the Soviet Union, 11 of which were published in June 1931. He was later criticized for a subsequent denial of the widespread famine of 1930 to 1933 in the USSR, most particularly the Holodomor. Beginning in 1990, there were calls for the Pulitzer Prize Board to revoke Duranty's prize. The Pulitzer Board declined to revoke the award in 2003, said the articles which it examined in making the award did not contain, quote, clear and convincing evidence of deliberate deception, end quote. Back to the text. In an article given to the World Press, Walter Duranty wrote in the most brutal prose that the era of, quote, Litvinov diplomacy was finished. That the era of Litvinov diplomacy was finished and that Stalin must now come to an agreement with Hitler. Wikipedia says Maxim Litvinov lived from 1876 to 1951 and was a Russian revolutionary and prominent Soviet statesman and diplomat who served as People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs from 1930 to 1939. Maxim Litvinov was an advocate for diplomatic agreements leading to disarmament and was influential in making the Soviet Union a party to the 1928 Kellogg-Briand Pact. He was also responsible for the 1929 Litvinov Protocol, a multilateral agreement to implement the Kellogg-Briand Pact between the Soviet Union and several neighboring states. In 1930, Litvinov was appointed People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, the highest diplomatic position in the USSR. During the 1930s, Litvinov advocated the official Soviet policy of collective security with Western powers against Nazi Germany. So that's who Litvinov is. In an unbelievably cynical sentence omitted from the version published in New York City but included elsewhere, Walter Duranty reminded his readers, and unquestionably above all it was intended for his Nazi readers, that more Jews had been killed in the last 2 years in the Soviet Union than in all the years of Hitler's regime. There can be nothing startling in such an attempted orientation. It is a perfectly consistent development of the Stalinist course. Indeed, in 1933 the Kremlin also attempted but failed to secure a rapprochement with the then-young Nazi regime. Stalin's aim is to preserve, quote, socialism in one country, end quote, i.e. to retain Russia's territorial boundaries, i.e. to keep himself and his gang in power. To serve this aim, it was proper to come to agreement with the class enemy as represented by the democratic imperialisms. This was the policy of the Popular Front. Then why not, when that fails, by agreement with the class enemy as represented by the fascist imperialisms? And, in point of fact, there is no fundamental difference between the two tactics. End footnote. I'm going to reread the sentence that footnote was from. The illusions, the veils, the deceptions are abandoned. Stalin, as the press of the Fourth International has consistently predicted since Munich, has capitulated to Hitler. For the Russian bureaucracy and the new exploiters which it represents, and of which it is an integral part, there was no other course. Driven by an unbroken series of defeats for its external policy, knowing its utter failure within, faced with the universal hostility of the Russian masses, motivated solely by the desperate wish to save somehow its own power and privilege, the bureaucracy seeks a respite by throwing itself at the feet of the Nazi giant. The text of the, quote, non-aggression pact, end quote, put together with the previously signed trade and commercial agreement, proves it to be in reality an alliance. There is no escape clause, such as in all analogous treaties, provided for cancellation if either party were guilty of aggression against a third state. Hitler and Stalin each binds himself against any agreement with any power or group of powers directly or indirectly threatening the other. Unquestionably, there are secret pledges attached to the pact which go far beyond the public document. The Russian bureaucracy capitulates to Hitler in order to try to save its own neck, but it capitulates in vain. Far from bringing salvation, the signing of the pact only seals the doom of the bureaucracy. The sole question of the future is whether it will be put in its grave by Hitler once the treaty is no longer of use to him. An alliance, Hitler explains in Mein Kampf, is simply one of the weapons wherewith to crush an enemy, or by the Russian people once more rising in triumphant revolution to sweep away their tyrants and exploiters. The pact makes everything clear, throws everything to the surface. The meaning of the trials. How clear it is now why Stalin had to wipe out every vestige of the living tradition of the revolution, had to murder the whole generation of those who made the revolution. Where am I? Had to murder the whole generation of those who made the revolution. This piece, again, is from 1939. This quote above that Hitler says in Mein Kampf is simply one of the weapons where to crush an enemy. This is actually very insightful because Operation Barbarossa, which is the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Nazis, did not take place until 1941. The end of the Spanish Civil War. How clearly we can know now why Russian aid was withdrawn from Spain shortly after Munich, why Catalonia was abandoned without a fight, why the Spanish Stalinists accepted the Prieto Negrin surrender terms, perhaps also why Miaja was never expelled from the Communist Party. Miaja was a general, I believe, in the Republican. Yeah. Wikipedia says Jose Miaja. The internet's working. Anyway. The dismissal of Litvinov, the speeches of Stalin and Molotov to last winter's party congress. How clear they are all now. No wonder Stalin had to rule his state and his parties by an iron monolithism. He had to try to manufacture subordinates ready to embrace Hitler at his nod. But the Stalin-Hitler Pact, that ultimate betrayal of the masses of the entire world, is itself today swallowed up in the war crisis, is itself in fact only one part of the war crisis. When this issue leaves the press, the war may already have begun. If it is postponed another week or month or 2 months, what has changed? The world, the capitalist, imperialist world, is rotted through. There is no medicine. The crisis will not end until it is settled. If Chamberlain and Roosevelt and Hitler and Daladier and Stalin have their way and their war, for that is all that is left for them, it will be settled by the destruction of the very foundations and roots of civilization. Against them, and that prospect can be launched only the masses of the peoples of the world. Against them, and that prospect can be launched only by the masses of the people of the world in unremitting and final struggle with every nation against the rulers and the oppressors. In unremitting and final struggle within every nation against the rulers and the oppressors. The Stalin-Hitler Pact strengthened every sector of reaction. As it gives a free hand and concrete aid to Hitler, so it gives a new impetus and a new lie to Chamberlain and Daladier and Roosevelt. Under the new circumstances which it creates, Roosevelt aims to hurl the United States far sooner than would have been otherwise necessary into the war. But his imperialism, Roosevelt's and Chamberlain's as well as Hitler's imperialism, which is the foul mother of the pact, and of Stalinism itself for that matter, to denounce and reject the pact, and who but the utterly depraved could conceivably accept it, is wholly meaningless unless that rejection is coupled with the thousandfold renewal of the international struggle against world imperialism. For every worker in every nation, the main enemy remains the enemy at home. The end. Thank you for listening. I apologize for my internet not working and me not being able to look up these fucking things that I was intended to look up, but I don't know. I don't know who, never mind. Thanks for listening.